Presently, I'm profoundly troubled by the intensifying brutality from police and Revolutionary Guard forces in Iran. When an administration can solely preserve its authority through force, then it's essentially terminated. I'm convinced we're currently observing the terminal days and weeks of this administration. Germany's Chancellor has pressed Iran to participate genuinely in these negotiations to conclude its nuclear initiative. Addressing audiences in Doha, Friedrich Merz stated his nation is ready to escalate the pressure if necessary. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has announced that Iran's administration is experiencing its concluding days and weeks as the Islamic Republic plunges into economic catastrophe. When an administration can exclusively sustain authority through brutality, then it's fundamentally at its conclusion. Per Merz, who addressed during his journey to India, I presume that we're currently witnessing the terminal days and weeks of this administration. The citizenry is now revolting against this administration. Merz became the initial G7 authority to forecast the collapse of Iran's administration, confronting widespread demonstrations. His remarks arrived as politicians and investors evaluate the likelihood of the Islamic Republic's breakdown and extensive ramifications for geopolitics and energy commerce. This isn't conjecture from opposition campaigners. This is the authority of Europe's biggest economy openly announcing that Tehran's theocratic framework has entered irreversible breakdown. Distribute this broadly because when Western authorities begin publicly forecasting regime breakdown, it indicates they possess intelligence verifying Iran's administration cannot endure the present urgency. Before we disclose how Iran's currency has forfeited 20,000 times its worth in 4 decades, generating economic circumstances that render regime persistence unachievable. Subscribe to daily military talks for examination. Mainstream broadcasting won't deliver. The Iranian rial's worth has crashed dramatically, dropping from roughly 42,000 to above 1.1 million against the US dollar, making buying capacity almost non-existent when acquiring merchandise from beyond the nation. On January 14, 2026, the conversion rate stood at 1.1 million rials per dollar. Yet unofficial commerce rates convey the genuine narrative. Iran's rial descended to fresh historic bottom on unofficial markets, with the US dollar quoted at approximately 1.47 million rials. The euro was exchanging around 1.72 million rials, and the pound at roughly 1.9 for million rials per merchants. This isn't incremental deterioration. This is currency disintegration transpiring in actual time. Consider what those figures signify. At the period of Iran's 1979 revolution, the dollar exchanged at approximately 70 rials. By early 2026, the conversion rate has violated 1 point per million, signifying the rial has forfeited approximately 20,000 times its worth. 20,000 times. All rials possessed in 1979 is presently valued at 0.00005 of its initial buying capacity. This annihilates reserves, renders agreements insignificant, and makes economic organization unachievable. When your currency forfeits 99.995% of its worth, you no longer possess an operating economy. Here's where the inflation figures expose the irreversible character of this emergency. Inflation rocketed to above 48.6% in October 2025 and 42.2% in December 2025, drastically affecting household finances. Yet those are general inflation figures. Food inflation conveys the genuine narrative of hardship. Food cost inflation in Iran was exceeding 70% in 2025. 70% yearly food inflation signifies costs for bread, rice, cooking petroleum, and meat multiplied in 18 months. Households that could manage appropriate meals in 2024 are presently selecting which household members consume today. The Ministry of Social Welfare declared in 2024 that 57% of Iranians are experiencing some degree of malnutrition. Above half the citizenry cannot manage sufficient nutrition, and it's deteriorating. Officials have cautioned of famines which might soon impact the nation. We're not discussing economic difficulty. We're discussing starvation in a country positioned on some of planet's biggest petroleum and gas deposits. Consider how the poverty explosion confirms the framework cannot sustain itself. As of March 2025, calculations span from 22% to 50% of Iranians existing under poverty threshold, a dramatic escalation from 2022. Even employing the most cautious calculation, that's 18 million Iranians forced below poverty in 3 years. Yet the genuine figure is almost definitely elevated. When food inflation strikes 70% and currency forfeits half its worth in 1 year, poverty percentages don't escalate incrementally, they detonate. Households that regarded themselves middle income in 2023 are presently selecting between electricity and food. Here's where the administration's personal forecasts disclose. They comprehend the economy is condemned. The World Bank forecasted Iran's economy would contract in both 2025 and 2026, and that yearly inflation would climb towards 60%. Consider those figures. 2 successive years of economic reduction while inflation nears 60%. That's not downturn, that's economic breakdown. The World Bank forecasts GDP might reduce by 1.7% in 2025 and additional to 0.8% in 2026, referencing limited commerce, weak commitment and burden on public finances. When GDP contracts by almost 5% across 2 years while inflation operates at 60%, actual household revenue collapses by approximately 65%. That signifies Iranian households have forfeited 2/3 of their buying capacity. In 24 months, nobody can endure that degree of economic annihilation, which is precisely why German Chancellor Merz announced the regime terminated. Consider how the commercial sector uprising indicates this occasion is distinct. What commenced in late December 2025 as protests over collapsing currency and climbing living expenses has expanded swiftly across municipalities and territories. The protests ignited after merchants in Tehran's Grand Bazaar closed their enterprises to denounce sharp decline of Iran's currency and deteriorating economic circumstances. The Tehran Grand Bazaar is essential to comprehending why this revolution will triumph. Originating back to minimum the 16th century, the bazaar is beyond a commerce zone. It is commercial nervous hub connecting traders and distribution networks, and principal location for networking. When it closes down or saturates with demonstrators, it indicates economic suffering is striking the commercial core of capital. The bazaarists are the commercial sector that transported Ayatollah Khomeini to authority in 1979. They financed the revolution against the Shah. They furnished organizational framework for Islamic Republic. For 45 years, they stayed devoted to the administration, even through penalties and economic difficulty. Presently, they're directing revolution against Khomeini's replacements. For initial occasion, conventional traders from Tehran Grand Bazaar have merged forces with students and industrial laborers. When the administration's fundamental economic base revolts against it, the framework cannot persist, and their requirements have progressed past economics. The declarations have advanced past modification. Demonstrators are openly demanding conclusion to Islamic Republic. They condemn administration for expending billions on external battles, while internal minimum compensation has descended to approximately $100 per month. $100 monthly compensation while food inflation operates at 70%. Execute the calculations. A household of 4 requires minimum for $100 per month simply for food at present costs. How do they persist on $100 aggregate revenue? They don't. Which is why millions are in streets insisting administration transformation. Here's where capital exodus confirms the economic death rotation cannot be reversed. Official intelligence indicates massive capital exodus around $20 billion in 2024. In the few months preceding June 2025, conflict net departures reached approximately $9 billion. Given progression of disturbances and Iran's semi-closure condition, a figure nearing $40 billion for remainder of 2025 seems believable. $40 billion in capital exodus from an economy this magnitude is devastating. Iran's complete GDP is approximately $300 billion. Forfeiting $40 billion to capital exodus constitutes 13% of aggregate economic production, vanishing into external banks and resources. That departure nourishes additional volatility and forces dollar-elevated enterprise proprietors and substantial investors transform resources into more transportable reserves of worth. They're organizing to depart Iran permanently because they comprehend the administration is terminated. Consider how the administration's reaction discloses they possess no remedies. Confronting yet another currency emergency, the administration has returned to recognizable, predominantly ineffective instruments that might propose temporary respite but ultimately intensify underlying difficulties. They attempted subsidized conversion rates, they collapsed. They attempted import limitations, they collapsed. They attempted capital regulations, they collapsed. Nothing operates because the core difficulty is organizational. The central bank no longer governs Iran's external currency whatsoever. Penalties have compelled administration to depend on shadow banking framework in which external exchange is possessed outside Iran, stationed in shell corporations and intermediaries past reach of standard state organizations. The funds exist, but it is unavailable for macroeconomic stabilization or public prosperity. Instead, it is directed through extraterritorial systems to sustain administration's confrontation with Western powers and Israel. Tehran possesses external exchange deposits but cannot retrieve them to protect the currency because executing so would reveal shadow banking systems to penalties. Therefore, the administration observes helplessly as its currency disintegrates and inflation annihilates the citizenry. And here's where international reaction confirms Western administrations detect weakness. Trump declared on Monday that any nation conducting enterprise with Iran will confront 25% tariff. That tariff danger targets the few surviving commerce connections Iran possesses. Germany is Tehran's most significant commerce associate in EU. Yet even that connection is minimal. German exports to Iran decreased by 25% to €871 million in initial 11 months of 2025, or below 0.1% of aggregate German exports, below 0.1%. Germany's Iran commerce is economically insignificant to Berlin, which is why Merz can openly announce the administration terminated, without concerning about economic repercussions. Iran has transformed so separated that even its nearest European commerce associate scarcely conducts enterprise with it anymore. And Trump's 25% tariff will eliminate what minimal commerce persists. Corporations won't hazard American commerce entrance for Iranian agreements, valued at portion of 1% of their income. Consider how petroleum income breakdown eliminates the administration's final economic sustenance. Iran acquired approximately $23.2 billion from petroleum exports in year to March 2025, yet might have acquired above $28 billion according to tanker monitoring and benchmark costs. Tehran markets petroleum at enormous reductions through shadow fleet tankers employing vessel-to-vessel exchanges and offshore retention to circumvent penalties. All of that diminishes the cost per barrel Iran ultimately obtains. Yet even more troubling, Petroleum incomes don't finance administration services anymore. Per draft finances, administration has forecasted simply 1,500 trillion rials in petroleum export incomes for itself, matching at official conversion rate to approximately $2 billion. $2 billion in petroleum incomes for central administration. Meanwhile, distributions connected to military and protection organizations constitute minimum 16% of aggregate budgetary capabilities. The IRGC receives multiples additional petroleum income than civilian administration. Religious organizations obtain close to half of administration's petroleum revenue. Therefore, petroleum funds finance revolutionary guards and mullahs while ordinary Iranians starve. That distribution cannot persist when citizens are battling for persistence. The citizenry will eventually eliminate the individuals appropriating their capabilities. Here's where the replacement emergency intensifies administration weakness. Discussion persists on prospects who might replace Ali Khamenei, who is 86. The supreme authority might expire tomorrow from natural circumstances. Who substitutes him? The prominent prospects are Mojtaba Khomeini, his son, and Hassan Khomeini, grandson of the revolution's originator. Mojtaba constitutes hardline persistence but is detested as nepotistic selection. Hassan might propose modification but absent authority foundation to execute anything. Neither prospect can command the credibility required to preserve the framework unified. During economic breakdown, the replacement conflict that ignites when Khomeini expires will immobilize the administration precisely when it confronts maximum burden, and that presumes Khomeini exists adequately long for structured replacement. If he's eliminated by Israeli bombardment or expires during demonstration suppression, the authority conflict becomes instantly brutal. Consider the core forfeiture of monetary independence that renders recovery unachievable. When separation between official and commerce conversion rates reaches 35-1, the rial no longer sufficiently operates as funds reserves transform insignificant. Agreements forfeit reliability, and economic organization disintegrates. The administration presently governs two distinct economies. One economy employs official conversion rates for subsidized imports and administration exchanges. The other economy, the genuine economy where ordinary Iranians exist, employs parallel commerce rates that are 35 times elevated. This separation renders standard economic function unachievable. If you execute agreement today pricing merchandise in rials, what will those rials be valued when compensation arrives due subsequent month? Nobody comprehends. Therefore, enterprise grinds to cessation. Commitment vanishes. Everyone hoards dollars and physical merchandise, because rial-denominated resources are definite to forfeit worth. Iran's redenomination scheme is frequently miscomprehended as currency rescue. It is predominantly accounting cleanup. Eliminating for zeros from currency renders costs more comprehensible, but doesn't restore buying capacity unless inflation drastically diminishes and stays reduced. The administration anticipates transforming 1 point per million rials to 140 new units. Will psychologically restart expectations. It won't operate. Citizens comprehend that new currency with identical monetary strategy generates identical inflation. You cannot manufacture your method out of economic breakdown triggered by manufacturing funds. Here's where French, British, and German declarations confirm Western agreement that administration is terminated. Last Friday, MERS released trilateral declaration with Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer and France's President Emmanuel Macron denouncing administration's suppression. The three biggest European economies synchronizing public declarations condemning Tehran. MERS observed that Berlin is in close communication with US, Britain and France on developments in Iran. The foreign ministers are in close communication with each other to guarantee there can be peaceful transition in Iran to democratically authorized administration. They're already organizing for post-administration Iran. That's the importance of synchronized declarations. Western administrations are situating themselves for transition scenario they regard unavoidable. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi condemned Mirza's inconsistent principles, instructing Berlin to possess some disgrace. Tehran's protective reaction confirms Mirza's struck vulnerability. If administration was confident in its persistence, it would disregard Mirza's remarks. Instead, it instantly retaliated, disclosing the announcement wounded. One thing is completely definite. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz became initial G7 authority to openly announce Iran's Islamic Republic is in its terminal days and weeks. Forecasting administration breakdown from economic emergency and widespread demonstrations. Iran's currency has forfeited 20,000 times its worth since 1979 revolution, with rial disintegrating from 70 per dollar to above 1 point per million, generating 70% food inflation that forced above half the citizenry into malnutrition while capital exodus nears $40 billion yearly. The administration no longer governs its personal external exchange deposits, which are confined in offshore shadow banking systems, signifying Tehran cannot protect currency or finance administration services while petroleum incomes flow to revolutionary guards instead of starving citizenry. We will observe whether Germany's evaluation confirms accurate that any administration demanding genocidal brutality to preserve authority is fundamentally terminated, regardless of how extended death struggles persist. Stay monitored.